Okay, so welcome to Possible Interview. So today we have Omar, and he's an intern from Leica Biosystems and also from CSL. So we will have Omar to talk about his experience. So Omar, can you talk about what is CSL, or is it what is Leica Biosystem to us?
Yeah, so CSL is a biopharmaceutical company based in Australia. Yeah, I started off by doing a Europe. So Europe is undergraduate research opportunities program, which CSIRO, which is the Australia's National Research Center, they sort of have a collaboration with different companies where they get students to go and be placed into different companies and sort of help out the supervisors and try to be a helping hand. And also the student gets to shadow a senior person in the industry. So yeah, I
Mhm.
started off by doing that. So I started off in the bioinformatics and artificial intelligence division at CSL, a 12-month program. It was an awesome experience, a very formative experience. And I was doing software engineering, which was slightly different to my degree. And yeah, and then I later transitioned to at Leica Biosystems as an R&D electronics engineer, and that was more hands-on, actually doing PCB design, a bit more tangential, a bit more rather in line with my degree. And yeah, that was an interesting experience as well. And that's also in the medical industry, slightly different, where we're actually manufacturing medical instruments. Leica is proud to essentially say that they have a instrument for each part of the workflow for cancer diagnostics. So all the way from biopsy to actually diagnosing if the cancer is detected. Leica has an instrument for that. So yeah, I've been lucky enough to work on some of those instruments. And yeah, that's been a very formative experience as well. Different to CSL, but I'm glad it was a good all-rounded experience.
Wow, that's really, really, really interesting, to be honest. Okay, but before we talk about more about the roles, we actually would like to know your background story. Like, what do you study? What do you actually study in uni? And also, like, what have you worked in the past to where you are now? So we can start with where do you study in uni and what did you study as your major?
Yeah, so I studied electrical and computer systems engineering bachelor's at Monash.
Mhm.
It's a bit of a mouthful, but there's also a minor in artificial intelligence. I started off actually studying at Swinburne. So I did my first semester and a half at Swinburne, and then I transferred to Monash. It was just a bit closer to where I was living, so it was a bit more convenient. But yeah, I was studying electrical electronics over there, and then I transitioned over here. So over here, it's a bit more of a software background. But yeah, that's my major. I also did worked in a few student teams, which were quite instrumental in the education side of things. So at Monash, I was part of Monash High Power Rocketry, and then there was also a drone team and a connected autonomous vehicles team. All three were amazing teams, which were very formative before I actually did formal internships. So yeah, that's my educational background.
Wow. Okay, okay. So you kind of like study here and there quite a bit. So it's like a progression from software engineering, IT, AI. So a lot of the industry are more on like technology, like tech, IT kind of things together. So which is kind of new at this generation because AI is actually progressively growing a lot in the industry as well, which I mean, I myself as a creative industry student also have to study a lot about AI, which is kind of sometimes confusing for me. So which I feel like is very impressive to really studying this AI about this technology, biotech kind of system in that movement. Great. So with that one, we also like to hear about where have you been working in the past, like before you're working as intern?
Yeah, so I I was working as a tutor for a while when I was in my second year. That was mainly just to sort of solidify my own experiences. Like I wasn't working for monetary thing. I was just doing it voluntarily. I just liked to sort of transfer knowledge as much as I could, and that was also helpful to myself because I was able to fortify some of the concepts that were slightly dwindling. Because after a semester, you sort of start to forget what you studied, but luckily, when I was actually doing a bit of tutoring, that helps me keep those concepts intact. Um, After that, I was student teamwork, and then I had a partial. It was a non-paid internship, virtual internship with Jefferson's lab, where I was just working on shadowing one of the professors there, and just working. Basically, they had a bit of a tutorial where they were explaining how to do machine learning stuff. It was very, very super high level, but I'm glad it was a good overview of things. And then I transitioned into my first role at CSL. I wouldn't consider this work, but voluntarily I was working, like I said, in three different student teams at different points in time. But yeah, those three were really important in sort of getting me the foundations to actually do those internships, because I was able to really translate those skills that I was getting from those experiences in student teams into internships very seamlessly, because they sort of simulate similar environments, high pressure, working as a team, multidisciplinary team. So you have to really learn to be good at communication, because you're working with people who aren't necessarily from your domain of expertise. So you sort of have to learn to communicate and break down complex topics into simpler things, and also learn what they're doing and their domain of expertise. So yeah, that was my background before I did my internship.
Wow. So that's actually already a lot of experience where it really like it gradually like grows into that industry. Yeah. So with all of the experience that you worked with in the past,
Yeah.
did you feel like as a student or, I mean, explain to me like I don't know anything about it. So if I am a student that I'm doing the same major as you, like in biotech or or AI, IT, in this kind of industry that relates it to CSL or even biosystem. So how do you think that communication is just a very big part? Like as you said, it can complex it down. It's a complex topic, and it kind of like you have to like break it down into different small topics. So do you think that as a student they have to go to a lot of this kind of study groups, research groups to really get those experience before stepping into this big industry, or do you feel like they can also do their own research, or what do you think is a good kind of knowledge, kind of,
Yeah.
like take everything in? Hmm.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree in terms of going to research groups and stuff like that. I think that is a very good way of sort of equipping yourself with the skills to communicate. Uh, Naturally, whenever you're working in a team which is multidisciplinary, you have to learn to communicate in simple terms, because you have to be able to explain to them stuff that they might not know, and you need to learn stuff that they know and you don't know. So that naturally is a very good experience. But I think another thing is that if you don't have that opportunity to be in those research groups, you can still learn while on the job, because I think most of these jobs, graduate roles or even internships, are actually very beginner friendly, in the sense that they try to be as welcoming as possible to anyone who's new. And most of the times, people who have been in similar shoes, so let's say a fresh graduate who's now gone into a junior role, or someone who was a graduate 5 years ago, they still have that experience dormant within their minds. So they know that the struggles that other interns and other graduates would likely go through, and they're more than happy to step in and help you out. So even if you don't get the opportunity to learn those things, you can always just ask a few people, like, how can I make my communication skills better? Should I be presenting myself in a better sense to other people who are not from my field? What else can I do to actually interact with these things?
So with all of the things that you just talk about, I feel like as a student, if they are graduating, or even they are just during that time of period of time, is this all of this working, like all of this experience that you have in the past, is it graduated? You already graduated when you're doing it, or is it when you are still studying, when you're still on your uni, kind of third year or second year? Which year are you in when you're doing all of this?
Yeah, so this was mainly, I would say, second, third, and then beyond. So first year was essentially me just trying to figure out how Australia is. So I'm an international
Hmm.
student, so I came to Oz and I was trying to figure out the work environment here. So I did nothing apart from just study. So from second year onwards, I took a conscious decision to try and actually expand my boundaries and try and work in different student teams, and just try to get what's the goal, like what's the best way to make yourself skilled enough, because I already knew from quite a few quite early on in my degree that university degree exclusively is not going to equip you with all the skills that you need for work. You sort of have to do a bit of work on yourself, in the sense that you either work in student teams, you volunteer at someplace, you do your regular jobs, you tutor, you do these kind of little things to sort of skill yourself. Apart from just learning the theoreticals and giving your exams, there are other things you have to do to equip yourself. So I knew that, but I was trying to figure out what's the best way of doing this. And I think it was probably my second and third year where I was mainly doing student teams. So the three student teams I was mentioning, that was across my second and third year. And then in third year, I sort of took a conscious decision that it's time to sort of step away from student teams and then transition into actually doing internships, and then eventually a graduate role. So I was looking into those things, particularly because I was also injured. So I couldn't go into uni campus quite often. So I was like, you know what, this is the best opportunity for me to step away and go into internships. yeah, so I started off with a virtual internship, which was at the latter half of my third year, and then I did my CSL internship, and now my Leica Biosystems placement.
Oh, cool. Okay, okay. So starting off your second year of uni, it's already been very, very full with a lot of internships, with a lot of experience, and really, really taking in a lot of like how international students can actually grow a lot and learn a lot during this time. Because
Yeah,
usually people, when they think about as an international student in Australia, they would think about visa restrictions, work limitations, this kind of stuff, which kind of now we kind of can understand like if you are actually have the same kind of major as you, Omar here, you can actually do different kind of internship that can also really helps you in your future graduate programs. Great. So with that one, for any listeners or anyone that is not like don't even know what is CSL or they don't even know what is Leica Biosystem. Can you kind of like explain what does this employer or what does this companies do and what they actually do or what they actually produce?
yeah. So CSL is a massive company which does a bunch of different things. Um, I was sort of in a intersection, or rather in a niche part of the group where I was working on automating workflows for I'm trying to be not as technical as possible, but essentially we're trying to automate workflows for certain bioinformatics stuff. Just a very super high overview. So the supervisor is actually doing the biomedicine side of things, and I was placed as a computational student to try and automate that into a website and then interface that with a high performance computing cluster in the back. So CSL's work was sort of tangential to what I was doing. I was working mainly on how I can use this solution at CSL, automate it for the life scientists and the geneticists who work at CSL, and make their lives a bit easier. Because as it comes to multidisciplinary teams, you have a person who's developed a solution that's quite computationally, let's say, taxing. Like someone has to be computationally savvy to do those things. And you also have life scientists who have the biomedicine and the biology kind of understanding, but they don't have necessarily the computer savvy kind of skills. So you want to bridge that gap, and that's where I was placed. I was sort of placed to make that automation of workflows easier and just make it quicker. So I think the workflow usually takes 2 days to run. After interfacing it with CSL's high performance computing cluster, it took a couple of hours. So that was mainly where I was placed, a bit tangential to what CSL actually produces. CSL produces medicines and all that stuff. Um, at Leica Biosystems, I'm a bit more in line with what actually Leica Biosystem produces. So in this case, we produce instruments which are used for cancer diagnostics. And I was placed in a couple of different projects. I'll walk you through a couple of them just to give you an idea of what I was actually doing. So at Leica, we have these instruments again, like which do advanced staining, and there are particular sensors which can be, let's say, slightly out of spec. So we want to be able to quantify are they within spec or not, because we want to make sure that we're very really tight in our tolerances and make sure we produce a perfect product. So to do that, we have to be very very careful in our testing, and we have to be like very rigorous to do that. So we have to build test jigs, we have to do those kinds of things. So I was involved in building as soon as I joined, I was put onto a project where I was building a jig to quantify how accurate our sensors are. And that involved a bunch of things. So it involved PCB design, which is electrical. It involved actually making an app, which was software. It also involved me doing a bit of 3D printing. And we have a 3D printer at Leica, which is a 3D printer room, rather. So that's pretty exciting. So I did a bit of mechanical stuff with that. And then you also have documentation, which is crucial in engineering in general. So yeah, that was my experience at Leica. And then recently I've been working on making test jigs for another of the instruments. So my work has been slightly multifaceted. So even though I joined as an R&D electronics engineer, I've been working on a bunch of different aspects. So mechanical, software, electrical, and yeah, a bunch of things. I hope that answers your question,
So
by the way.
yeah, really, really, I really like all the details, like really opens up what you are really doing in during that when you're in the internship. So that means I would say in CSL is more like a bridging a gap between the bio and AI, so biotech and also AI kind of like combining. So you're kind of like the middle person to really get two of that together to really make them work in the team, I would say so.
Yep.
And then for Leica, it's more like electronics, and then like all the I would say it's more like a little bit more electronic side. Is it so? Yeah.
Yeah,
And then it's more on the instruments and more on the medical instruments, I would say, instead
yeah.
of like because when people think about Leica, it's all about camera. So if you talk about, I'm working in Leica, so people will be like, oh, so you produce camera lenses or something like that. So that's what people's first impression like normally do. So when you talk about all this, we kind of understand, so they not just do cameras, they really do also medical instruments. They also have a lot of different kind of things. And there is engineers, interns out there like really producing high quality stuff for the medical industries as well, not just cameras. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Actually,
Thank you so much.
a point on
Yeah.
that. So I remember when I was joining, I had a similar kind of perspective where like I only knew through the camera side of things. But when I joined, I was actually surprised at how much manufacturing is actually done. But sort of like
Mm.
in general, in Australia, you don't have that many manufacturing industries who actually manufacture in Australia. Leica is one of the few where you actually have the R&D, you have the
Yeah.
manufacturing side of things, the production, and you also have the testing and everything in-house within one building. So you see your product go from your screen where you're doing the R&D to actually being produced and then coming back and being actually tested to make sure everything's fine. So you see that all under one roof, which is a great thing. And like
Wow.
it's sort of unique in that. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I thought I'd point that out.
And I feel like as an intern, when you are doing these kind of projects, when you are trying testing every single prototype or even like all these instruments in the lab and then rendering it into an actual product in the industry or in the market, and you really, really will feel a lot of, proud of yourself. And then really look in that growth in the industry is kind of also a really big development, I would say.
Yep.
Yeah. And also, with that one, I would like to ask, what do you think that makes Leica so unique in the Australian market, or what do you think that Leica bioinformatics, is it?
Biosystem.
Bio
Close enough.
biosystem. Yeah. So Leica Bioinfosystems, this company, what do you think they are unique for? Because you say that it's medical instruments and also not just camera. So what do you think in this Australian market, what they are very unique for?
Yeah, so Leica essentially, I would say, is probably the market leader in terms of advanced staining instruments. I
Mhm.
mean, there's a bunch of so Leica is under a conglomerate called Danaher, and Leica Biosystems has sister companies, and there's a bunch of little details there, nuances. But sticking to just Leica Biosystems and what we work on in particular in the Melbourne side of things, we build, let's say, I'd say we have four main instruments that we're building. One of them is quite new, and that's probably the market leader in terms of advanced staining, and that's probably the cutting edge of actual research at the moment. So yeah, I think that that's one thing anyone you would ask who works at Leica is proud of, is probably the fact that Leica has an instrument which is at the cutting edge of research in that particular field. Um, yeah, and also Leica's quite popular in terms of their other three older instruments. They're reliable. They've been the market leaders in terms of actually. I think they have a massive market share. I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they're probably the top choices for hospitals to actually get in.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah.
So how about CSL on the other hand? What do you say that what's the organization's unique about
Yeah, so CSL, Aussie-owned company. It's a homegrown kind of company. I think what's unique about it is that it's a massive company in the sense that it has a lot of different branches and a lot of different things that they do. In particular, I think in Melbourne itself, they have like three different sites, if I'm not mistaken. In my sense, I would say what I would be most proud of as working as a person at CSL would be that we have this really good team in bioinformatics and AI, where we have, I would say, the best, or not best, but rather the top researchers in that field all in one room. So there's this conference, which is, I'm not sure if you know this, it's called Abacus or ABACBS.
it?
Um, and I think the top actual presenters and people who organize that event all sat like within 20 meters of where I used to sit. So yeah, it's like a massive concentration of the smartest people in that particular field in one room. It's an awesome thing. But yeah, CSL does a lot of different things. I'm not super familiar with all of their different branches, but my particular branch in bioinformatics and AI at CSL Behring was, yeah, surrounded by some of the smartest people I've ever met. and yeah, the market, literally the research leaders of that space.
Wow. Then wow, like having an internship in that company would be such great like opportunity, I would say, because like literally you say that you're just sitting 20 minutes across like all the smartest people that you know in that industry and in that room, and then you really can listen to them working on all these kind of projects and stuff that really producing in this industry, which is very, very interesting to hear, to be honest. Okay, so with that one, do you have any like CSL? Do you think that a lot of people have misconception about CSL, and what do you think is the biggest misconception about this and in your field?
Yeah, I would say the fact that when I was applying myself, I thought it was completely a biomedicine kind of field. Like there was not going to be much scope for someone who with a computational background. But there's
Yeah.
surprisingly a lot of computational background because anytime you have data, which you have a lot in biomedicine, you have to analyze it and you need to actually be smart with the way you're actually analyzing your data. A lot of those times you have to get someone with a computational background to do that. So yeah, I think one of the biggest misconceptions would be to always think about the company's end product as the actual field. So like a Biosystems, it's a medical instrumentation company. So anyone with a slightly vantage point would say this is a person who's done biomed or someone who studied medicine would be going into, but that's not the case. You see hardcore electronics engineers working there. So it's because all these products they usually are multifaceted, like they have different aspects where different teams are working on. So we have a science team at Leica, which is an amazing science team, but that's not the only team at Leica. You have a massive hardware engineering team, you have a software engineering team, you have all these different aspects. So the same in CSL, you have people might have the perception that this is a purely biomedicine kind of field, but no. If you study electrical engineering, you can get in. If you study mechanical, there's scope for that as well. There's always scope for these places because as engineers, you're working together to build a solution, and you need to have different expertise to do that. You can't just be one particular domain.
Cool, cool. So it means that even you're studying biomed, or if you're studying in software engineer or even electronic engineer, mechanical engineer, you might as well meet together because all the end products actually need all this little aspect to really work together to get the end product. Cool,
Exactly.
cool.
You
Yeah.
put that in a lot more coherently than I did.
Thank you. Okay. All good. So with that one, I really want to know, like, because you're working in two companies, will it be a bit work life, is it balance? And also like, can you kind of like walk us through how a day in your life looks like as your role in CSL and also your role in Leica Biosystems?
Yeah, so at CSL, my role at the time it sort of coincided with I think COVID second year, so like 2021, I believe, or 2022 rather. So we were still the first half of my CSL internship was completely online, so we weren't really going into the building, which was an interesting experience. You learn how to work from home, you learn to make a good environment, separating your place in your house for study, for work, and for sleeping and all that kind of stuff. So I learned that aspect, but I did definitely miss going into the office and actually meeting the people I'm going to be working with. But yeah, thankfully, in the second half of my placement, we were able to go back into the office, and yeah, those were probably the best 6 months of my time at CSL. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. And in terms of my day to day, it was sort of always just start off with what tasks did I have from yesterday that I left on, make a list of it, go through with my supervisor. So at CSL, it was mainly me working with my supervisor. So it was sort of like a project based kind of a placement. So I was working with my supervisor. My supervisor goes through the list of stuff that we need to work on for the week. I make sure that I'm trying to get a to-do list and also get a priority of what we need achieved, because obviously you have a lot of stuff to get done, but we want to make sure that we can actually do this in a achievable time and break it down to smaller goals. So I would just make sure that I have these list of items that I can confirm with my supervisor we need done and when we need them done by, and then slowly attack them and sort of get them done. At CSL, I was mainly doing software engineering, a lot of web development. So I was working with Flask, Python, and just sort of setting up an environment there. And then in the background, I was working with Slurm, which is a utility manager. So it was basically working with high performance computing clusters and just making sure that we can take that computation that we're doing on the laptop and move that over to our HPC so that it's quicker. So yeah, that was mainly my work, just sort of getting everything together. And at Leica Biosystems, Yeah, like I just worked there today, so I'll just walk you through what I did today. I start off usually by going through my email backlogs, just making sure there's nothing I've missed that's important. Go through my meeting calendar, make sure there's no conflicts, and then I just go down to either electrical lab, or recently I've been going to this building, which is a bit of a secluded building where you have these massive test jigs that don't really fit into labs. So yeah, that's been interesting. I've been working, essentially living down there for a while now. You have these jigs that you're working with. You try and show them to people to see if they have any suggestions for improvements. You make those improvements, and it's an iterative process. All of engineering is always an iterative process. So you get feedback, make those improvements, show them again, get feedback, make those improvements. You do that, and hopefully you have something that the management is happy with, and we can actually test our stuff with. And then yeah, and there's also badminton on Thursdays at Leica, so yeah, I usually look forward to that. In terms of management stuff, we usually have one-on-ones with our manager every week. If we're working full time, if we're during the semester, if I was doing an internship at that time and during the semester, then it would be every fortnight. So you have a bit of a one-on-one meetings. You also have daily management, which recently Leica has implemented. So you have this 15-minute stand-up where everyone just quickly goes through their updates, just to see if everyone is on the same page, and just to do a pulse check in case someone else needs a bit of help. Yeah, that's the day-to-day at Leica.
Wow, I would say it's a very full on schedule, and it's actually quite interesting because when people talk, like think about informatics or biosystems, or even just about IT itself in that area or AI, they always talk about just in front of the computer and just keep typing and reload, just keep, programming or keep testing. That's what they thought about, but they don't know like you have to go into this kind of labs. We really have hands-on experience in all these kind of things. So it's not just about sitting in a room, but also going into different rooms, and you have to communicate with different people, different groups, different kind of research teams, scientists, different kinds of industry really comes together in doing that, which is actually not what I thought was. So thank you so much for the insight. I would want to ask this one, which is kind of my kind of own question as well. So what is the coolest thing that you have worked on so far in CSL and also on in Leica?
Yeah, at CSL, just working with so we have at CSL a high performance computing cluster called Ada, which was named,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, after the first human computer, Ada Lovelace. Yeah, it's a massive computer, which massive computational computer. So you have a lot of different computational resources, which are pooled together in that place, and you can do massive amounts of computation with that thing. So I remember when I did my actual testing, I was testing I think six variants. It's a bit technical, six variants, and it took me around 9 hours on my laptop to do that. And then when I actually interfaced it with CSL's Ada, it took me like 20 minutes. So I was like, wait, this is an interesting amount of power, and this you need to have a bit of responsibility with this. And that was just me tapping into a bare minimum. So they only allocate resources that you actually need. So I'd imagine like actually that is a massively powerful computer, and that was the first time I ever worked with something like that. That was probably the coolest thing. And also, just being surrounded by some of the best researchers in that space was also an amazing experience. At Leica, I think the 3D printing room is quite awesome. You see some amazing stuff there. The electrical lab is a hobbyist's dream. So anything you wish you wanted is in the electrical lab. And yeah, also just the fact that the team trusts people who are quite new to the industry, so like a graduate or intern or all those kind of things. They actually trust them to build some critical components for the company. I think that's a cool, awesome thing that I've been recently experienced at Leica. Yeah.
Oh, that was a very cool. So you really have that hands-on and really close experience and get to really hands-on on AI stuff, tech stuff, which I feel like in most of the cases, not a lot of people have that kind of chance to, really have a closer look and really imagine, I want to say imagine, really happen just right in front of your eyes, like all these high-tech computers that you're talking about. And you just mentioned like how you really can see if just a little program that can take 9 hours, you can just 2 hours. Poof.
Mhm.
That's really, really amazing. And
Yeah.
for me, it's kind of like a first time listening to all this kind of experience, which is quite, I would say a useful insight. At the same time, I really opens up a different kind of point of view about CSL and also about Leica at the same time. So with that one, I would also ask you, um, what is the first reason you would tell the other graduates or any other your friends or anyone who is actually currently studying in this major or related major to work at CSL or Leica?
Yeah. So I would say it really depends case to case. CSL, again, it has a variety of different roles. So yeah, if you're interested in that kind of research side of things and you also want to do the computational side of things, I think CSL is a good place to do research in the industry. I think it's very well placed because it's the market leader in Australia, and you also have some of the best researchers working there. So I think it's an awesome place to surround yourself with some of the best. At Leica, if you have a real thirst for lifting the hood, so the metaphor where you lift the hood and you see underneath it, so you're really seeing the nitty gritty side of things. I think that's what someone who would work at Leica would enjoy. I think someone who's a hobbyist, they would really enjoy Leica, especially in the R&D hardware side of things, because you're really building stuff. You're creating stuff, prototyping them, testing them out, and you're really hands-on. So anyone who worked in student teams and wants something to do similar in industry, Leica is the place for you.
And would you say second year or a third year would be a very good opportunity to really get hands-on on it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, okay. That's really interesting because I feel like a lot of people when they're studying AI or studying about tech, it's a very new thing, and they thought that some companies would kind of like not really touch on that, or they would feel like they don't really put a lot of time and effort researching this. But actually, from what you just told, I can feel like the industry is really, really growing into this kind of AI bioinformatics or even like IT kind of industry, I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was trying to think like what kind of like professional terms that I can really, really use to get this appropriate. So
yeah.
trying to fix my mind. Sorry about that.
No, that's
Okay,
all good.
so Omar, can you talk about how do you find out about CSL job openings, and can you tell us about how do you find out about Leica Biosystem as well?
Yeah, so the CSL one's an interesting one. So when I was applying as an international student to different countries, I was back in Saudi Arabia. I was looking into US and UK particularly because they have this thing in a few universities called Europe, which is undergraduate research opportunities program. So I always wanted to go into research, and I wanted to find a good nexus where I could have research while also studying the semester. And I was trying to find something equivalent in an Australian university. And I remember when I was at Monash, I actually wrote a few emails to the head of the Faculty of Engineering that there should be something like this. So they have these summer research scholarships, but they don't have these scholarships that happen throughout the semester. Sometimes in the summer, international students especially, they would want to work so they can actually earn a bit of things for the fees, but then they also want to do a bit of research during the semester, and they didn't seem to be an option for that. And I remember when I was looking around, I actually found that CSIRO, they actually do Europe. I was like, this is interesting, and I applied for it just to see what happens. I got an offer. They said that they're interested in someone with a computational background, and I was like, this is a perfect fit. So yeah, CSL was purely, I saw their website. They had this thing called Europe, which I believe opens in September or something like that, and they have different companies with which they collaborate that placement with. So CSIRO would place you with CSL, or it would place you with MCRI, Murdoch Children something hospital, or it would place you in different companies essentially. And in my case, it was CSL. So I found out purely through that website, CSIRO's website, and Leica Biosystems was through Monash's co-op. So I believe Monash has a co-op program that they've recently introduced. Shout out to Kofian and the team for arranging that stuff. And what they do is they essentially make it more of a cleaner process for students who study at Monash to apply to positions at different companies. And in this case, Leica was offering a 12-month placement, I believe. And yeah, I just applied for that and went through the interview process and then got the job. But generally, how I do research for jobs is that I usually go through different lists. So one of them is on Prospel itself. Prospel has a very good list of actual companies you can apply for as an international student, and you don't have to have PR or citizenship. So that's very helpful. You get that list of things, you get their closing dates, put them into a list of what you're actually interested in. So you can choose your categories. For me, my categories were electrical, software, robotics, and AI. As you can tell, I'm very indecisive. So I put in a bunch of different branches of stuff I was interested in, found a list of companies that seemed interesting, but into their projects. A lot of them, because all these companies, they want to market what they're doing. So you can go into their websites, look at the projects that they're looking at. If it seems like it seems like your jam, or if it resonates with what you're interested in, definitely make a short list of those companies, and then make sure that you can the other stuff in the role that align with you. So if you're applying for a graduate role, make sure that the duration of that graduate role is something that you're okay with. Some companies do 14 months, some do 12 months, some do 3 years, and you want to make sure that it resonates with you. So that was another filter I was using to figure out what jobs I want to apply for. And then you also want to look at the culture, because if you're going to be working full time, you're going to be spending 1/3 of your waking time with your workmates. So you want to make sure you actually find a good culture, somewhere you can actually fit. So yeah, that's a crucial thing, and you can usually find that out through Glassdoor or some of these websites where you have reviews of previous employees or current employees, and they usually are quite honest about what they think is the cultural rating of that place. So you'll have a good idea of that. And then there's a bunch of other factors, but you also want, if you're applying for a graduate role in particular, I think one thing that's important, obviously salary goes without saying, but it's also important to have a bit more of a nuanced perspective, where stuff like roll-off salary. So roll-off salary is when you move from a graduate role to a junior role, what's that roll-off salary that you usually want to get? That's something that is sometimes lost when someone's looking at just purely the salary, because sometimes people look at, oh, this is a higher salary, but that's a 3-year graduate role, and this role is not as lucrative in terms of money, but at least it is a 14-month role. So it's a shorter role, but somehow when you roll off, you actually get a better return on investment in the future. So I think those things are crucial to look at as you're looking for roles. I didn't really look into that much. I was more interested about the work I was doing. So I was like, oh, this is CSL is interesting, Leica is interesting, and I just sort of went with it.
Okay, okay. That's actually a lot of details that we really want to hear about as well. So I would kind of say Prospect really has a lot of little benefits, like the features really helps a lot, like when you're choosing about the location, the working kind of which kind of industry the majors, or like what kind of topics that you're looking for, like what you just said, like you put a bunch of it because you don't really know what to decide. And with that one, I would just want to ask about the application process when you confirm that you want to apply for CSL and also for Leica. Can you just kind of like walk us through how do you get into CSL graduate program, or like how do you get into Leica graduate program?
Yeah, so CSL, I didn't apply for their graduate program, but I believe their process would be similar to a lot of other places that I applied. So this year I was applying for quite a few different places, and I sort of got a bit of experience in how different companies do recruitment. I would say I would divide this into two branches. There are companies that are a bit more on the bigger scale, which they have a very filtered, a very large process of interviewing. They have like lots of different filters that they go through. So they start off with usually a kind of a digital interview where you have an asynchronous kind of not face to face, but rather an asynchronous interview with the camera. You're just looking into the camera and you're answering a bunch of questions, and then you have a few written questions. They usually, if you go through that, then they have another hurdle where you go through behavioral tests, aptitude tests, psychometric tests, where they just quickly check your intelligence with games and basically gamifying the interview process, which is interesting. It's some people find it a bit annoying, but I think it's an interesting way of sort of just gauging how logically reasonable the candidate is. And then you eventually go on to a few more steps, and then there's a final interview where the team sort of interviews you and checks what is this person a good fit for the team? If they are they technically a good fit? Are they behaviorally a good fit? That kind of stuff. Uh, at Leica, it was a very straightforward process. So I applied for the program. They saw the resume and cover letter and academic transcript, and then they shortlisted me for an interview. I did the interview, and then I got in. But then there are other companies where you have a lot longer processes. You have some of them have assessment centers where you actually physically travel to an assessment center and have a bunch of assessments to see if the candidate is good fit. And then there's also other companies. I applied for a graduate role earlier in the year, where essentially what you do is you just they give you 25 minutes to come up with a 5-minute presentation on a radical idea for that field, and you have to present it in a good communicating and a good technical sense. So yeah, there are different branches of interviews. Mainly, they fall into those two steps where you have a bit more of a formal process, where you have a bunch of steps: digital interview, psychometric tests, final interview, all that stuff. And then you have the other companies which sort of just have the traditional send your resume, cover letter, and CV in, and your academic transcript, and then here's your interview. If you do well, you're in. That kind of stuff. At CSL, it was a simple process again because I was through Europe. So I had this interview with CSIRO, and then they had, I think the CSIRO team, they checked if I was a good fit or not, and then they had the supervisors come in who were actually working with me. They said that you need to check if this person is good. So we had an interview with them that was more technical, and then I believe that was the end of that process.
Cool, cool, cool. So I would say in this kind of industry or in your field, more of them, do you think that they look into a lot of like what grade are you on, like GPA or like what kind of the grading system? Is it really, really matters when it comes to a interview into CSL or like a company? And also do you think that if none of the people or students or graduates, if they are not really related to this kind of field, but they wanted to try to step into this field and start working or start as a graduate intern, do you think this would be recommended?
Yeah. So on your first question about uh, basically grades and how important they are. I think they're looking for a minimum grade, where above that they basically don't really care too much. So as long as you have passable grades, that's all they're really looking for. At least in my experience, I'm sure there are companies that are a bit more stringent on really looking at like very, very high grades. But usually, I don't think, I think companies are a bit more nuanced and they understand that grades aren't the best metric of seeing if that candidate is a good fit for the role. I think there are a lot of different factors that a person can bring to the role that aren't just necessarily how good you can regurgitate theory in an exam. I don't. I think companies are a bit more nuanced than that, and hopefully they've learned from the past or something. I think they're a bit more sophisticated in their approach to try and get someone recruited. So in terms of grades, I would say, yeah, as long as a passable grade is reached, I don't think they care too much. What they're looking mainly for is how much of a person, how eager the person is, how much passion does the person have with that field, how much are they willing to learn, how much are they willing to absorb. Because as an intern and grad, you're essentially looking at a person as a sponge. Like they want to see a person who can really absorb information and then work on it. They're not looking for someone to be a person fully equipped with all the skills and then they come into the role. Because if they were looking for that, they would just get a junior engineer or a senior engineer. If they want to get an intern or a grad, what they want is they want someone who's really fresh with fresh ideas, and they want someone who's willing to learn, and they want that sponge, a person who can really absorb that information and then use those skills later on. So usually these positions, these internships, that's one of my things that I always recommend is that if you can find a longer internship, go for that. Because at least in my experience, it takes just 3 months to really get into that role. If you're going to have a 3 month internship, it can slightly be a bit too stringent in time. But if you have like a 6 month or 12 month one, then you can really get into the role, sink your teeth in the summer, and the semester you're sort of chilling and you can really work on stuff easily. You don't have to establish connections or any of those things that you've already handled in your summer vacation. So yeah, that's one thing I would say is always be eager to learn, willing to learn, be keen and passionate. That's the most important thing that these roles are looking for, and that sort of shows in your application. So your cover letter, it anyone reading it can tell if the person is passionate about that or if this is just a boilerplate cover letter. If the person is genuinely interested in that field, that cover letter will show that. So try and be reflective of that when you're writing your cover letter. In your resume, I mean, there's not much you can put in terms of creative stuff in your resume. Just make a standard template resume, have skills there, I guess, have emphasis on the projects you worked on. Actually, projects is a good way of showing that you're interested. Have projects listed on your resume so you can show, yeah, I'm actually quite interested with your field. And yeah, in the application, that's what they're looking for. Grades are not super important. If you get good grades, that's bonus, that's awesome. But if you don't, do not be disheartened. Still apply, and hopefully they can see your passion through, and maybe they'll take you in.
Oh, good. Oh, good. So do you think that people that is not with that degree or like maybe they're in biomedical but they don't have fully equipped with engineering kind of skills, do you think that it's easy enough to get into the interview?
Yeah, so I mean, I won't give false promises. So I do know some companies do have this thing where if they have a particular role that they're applying, or rather they're recruiting for, they do have filters saying that if someone studied a particular degree, or they haven't studied a particular degree, we're not going to take them to the next stage. But I still think that there are a lot of companies out there that are a bit more nuanced, and they are more understanding that a degree is just it's a metric, or rather a indicator that the person is able to solve problems. Like if I study electrical engineering, that doesn't mean my electrical engineering degree is equivalent to what someone else has studied, because we might have studied completely different electives. We might have approached our degrees completely differently. So degrees doesn't necessarily mean that you've got expertise on that topic. A lot of the best software engineers I've seen are not actually people who studied computer science or software engineering. They've studied something completely tangential. I remember one of the best engineers I've seen was actually a person who studied business as their main thing, but they were a really good hobbyist, and they sort of picked up stuff on their own. So I think sometimes companies can be a bit more formalized in the thing that, oh, if you haven't gotten a degree in this exact little niche of a major, we're not going to recruit you. But I think most companies are a bit more open-minded, and they do definitely look at your projects and look at your skills more than they do at just your degree, because there are a lot of people who self-learn stuff, and I think excluding them would be unfair for a company, and I think the company would be missing out on an awesome a bunch of people.
Yeah, true, true. So I would say that, so if a student that is really interested in that company, well, even though they are not studying that related degree, I would say you have enough passion, enough effort, or I would say if you have the idea, the creativity, or even you have the critical thinking skills about certain projects about the company or about that field, if this would also be a very good opportunity to get into any of the companies to that related field, or even get into CSL, or even get into like I would say so, right?
Yep,
Oh,
definitely.
good. Oh, good. Okay. So with that one, I would just want to ask, like, for CSL, how long, like, the entire application process took you? Is it more like like, how does it take them to get back to you to confirm that, after that interview that you say, the
Hmm.
final interview, like, how long does it take? Is it like a week for CSL? And then you can also talk about for Leica, how is it, how long is it going to take you?
Yeah, so CSL was, I believe I applied initially in July, and I didn't get a response for a couple of months, so I assumed that I wasn't selected. But then I got a response in September, which was quite late for an internship, which was over the summer. So like, this is interesting. I guess they're still looking for someone. So I got a reply in September, and I was still looking for an internship. So I was like, yeah, this is definitely something I'm looking for. Went for the interview. I think the interview was early October, and then I was given my second interview a week later. And then within a week, I was told that I'll be starting on 22nd of November. So it was a very quick process towards the end of the year. Um, and then at Leica, it was a similar process. It was a bit longer, but it started in August. So I put the application back in August, and then I got a reply a couple of months later. And then I had an interview, final interview in December, and then I started on 16th of Jan. Or rather, I had an interview in November, I had an offer on December, and then I started on 16th of Jan. So it was relatively quick processes, and both CSL and Leica were sort of later in the year. Usually, when you see graduate roles or internships, they either recruit in the beginning of the year. So you have a lot of the companies that recruit February, March, April. That's your golden period, and then you have that second golden period, which is June to August. I'd say those are the two main periods where recruitment happened. But yeah, CSL and Leica both were atypically outside those times, or rather those periods of time.
Okay, okay. So I would say like usually take around 1 to 2 months to like confirm, like if they don't miss out your application, I would say so. Yep.
Yeah, that's the one. Yep.
So with that one, I would say, what was the hardest part of the interview? Like, or the hardest part of the application process? Is it like when you preparing it, or when you are going for that interview, or like what is it? Like you feel like it's the hardest.
I'd say for interview, the hardest part for me was starting the prep for the interview. I always just put it off because a bunch of stuff, uni's coming along, exams are probably close by, that kind of stuff. So always starting the prep for interview was the hardest thing. But yeah, once I got into it, I would just, the most important thing is sort of just understanding the company you're looking to apply to. What do they actually work on? So you have, make sure you go to their projects, make sure that you understand what their current, previous, and their future projects are, just to see where they're kind of going. And then I'd imagine the things that people would be afraid of are the technical questions. But surprisingly, for me, at least in my experience, I didn't get too many technical questions. They were mainly based on how of a behavioral fit I would be for the team. So they were based on, um, I guess they see in your resume that if you're technical enough or not. I guess they get an idea of that, and then they want to see, wait, how well would this person gel with our team? So they were mainly focused on if you encountered this problem, how would you handle it? If you encountered a unruly employee or a workmate, how would you handle that? If you were running late for a deadline, how would you handle that? That kind of stuff. So it was mainly based on trying to understand how I would operate in their team rather than technical. There were technical questions, but they weren't difficult enough so that you need to prepare. It was mainly if you've done your university degree reasonably uh, well, passable, then you should be able
Mhm.
to get those technical questions easily. There are definitely companies that are a bit more stringent. Like if you're doing a software engineering internship, you'll be doing some code interviews and stuff like that. So obviously there will be your mileage will vary with different disciplines. But in my case, it just seemed to be more of a focus on the behavioral side of things and what future plans the person has and how that aligns with the company.
Cool. But with that, I would like to ask, like, do you have any interview that gets you a really tricky question? And which kind of question do you think is the most trickiest?
I think the most trickiest ones are where they sort of ask these questions like, "What's your weakest point or your weakness?" I think it's one of those pitfalls. Like if you try and actually give your genuine weakness, it can come across a bit. Uh, I'm not sure how the other interviewer will handle it, or if you try to make it into a strong point, then it just comes across as show offy. Like if someone says my weakness is I try too hard, like it's that's not your weakness, like that kind of stuff.
Right,
So I think
right.
sometimes it's a bit difficult to gauge how honest or frank you can be with your interviewer. It definitely comes with experience. But in my opinion, the best policy is just trying to be open and actually honest. So even if the interviewer sort of takes it in a negative sense, that's fine. You don't want to work for an employer who's taking everything in a negative sense, especially when they've asked you to point out something. So I think it's probably a good thing for you that maybe it saved you from not a good experience. So I think it's always important to be as honest as possible. Those are some tricky questions, trying to identify your weaknesses, but I think just be honest.
Right. So did you ever get that like what is your weakness question about, and how do you answer it? Like actually answer in the interview?
Yeah, I got that question, and I've sort of introspected, trying to understand what my actual weaknesses are. But I'm sure there are a lot of different weaknesses. But I think my main weakness would be that I've always been a very independent person in terms of working. So working in a team was sort of a challenge for me initially because I was really hell bent on doing everything myself, and I was a bit of a perfectionist in that sense, which is perfectionist in a bad way. I would actually delay projects just to finish something in a very minor, trivial details. So I think that was my main weakness. Like I would hold back the team a bit because I had these personal, trivial matters that I needed to address. But I think I was able to overcome that by student teams. So like I was working in student teams, and a couple of experiences, it taught me that it's better to be relaxed in your approach, and you don't need to be so overburdening. You need to be a bit more collaborative with your team. And then the internship sort of solidified that experience and taught me that yeah, it's important. There's this term, I don't know if you're aware of this, 10x engineer, where a person tries to be a thing that can do everything. And sometimes in engineering, you learn it's actually mutually beneficial for the entire team when a person is a bit more collaborative than trying to be a person that can solve all problems. You want to make sure that you actually collaborate as a team. So yeah, that was my main weakness, and hopefully I worked on that. But I'm sure there are definitely stuff I can iron out on that side of things.
Mm. That's a very good answer for that one. Definitely, this is why you get it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm kind of interesting. I'm actually kind of interested on how you prepare an interview. Like, do you write down the questions they will talk about, or do you really go and exercise on or practice any technical terms, or do you really research a lot about a company? Like, how do you prepare for an interview usually?
So my approach has evolved over the last couple of years. I started off by actually writing down questions and then answers I would like to give. And then I remember my brother, I did a bit of a rehearsal with my brother, and he told me that it just sounded too robotic and actually something that I pre-prepared, and it's something that's too obvious. I didn't realize it was actually obvious until my brother pointed it out. So I thought the best way is actually just have a few pointers of what you really want to bring up in your interview, and then just let your natural charisma sort of carry that interview. You don't need to memorize answers. You don't need to write down questions and answer them like that. You can just have a good idea. And I think as you practice or you do a few interviews, you sort of understand and you become comfortable in your skin. In that, like, there are some basic questions that will always be asked, like, tell us about yourself. I guess you could always prepare that from beforehand. But yeah, I think most other questions, just try and be relaxed and try to answer it on the question. I think one thing that sometimes people can forget is in interviews, they're not just looking at what you're answering. I think they're also looking at how you approach your answer and how you're about to structure it. They're looking for someone who's basically showing how they're formulating their answer in real time. They're not looking for someone to just regurgitate something they wrote down last night. They want someone who's able to think on the spot, come up with an answer, and then formulate that, make sure it makes sense, and then say it. So I think it's important to let that show. Try to be as natural as possible. It's good to be prepared, but don't overdo it by trying to memorize answers or anything like that.
True, true, true. I really totally agree with that. And with that being said, do you think that when you get into after this interview, when you got into this company, do you think that the expectation and reality, when you thought about you were going to into this job, what you were doing, and then what you're actually doing when you got this job, is there any differences? And then like, what is it kind of like surprise you when you first start out the job, like in CSL or in Leica?
Yeah, so at CSL, I would say definitely the amount of actual computational work. So I remember when I joined, I knew I would be doing computational stuff. I just didn't realize it would be that intense. Like I'd be actually working with high performance computing clusters. I had no experience in that, and I had no background in that. I'm just an electrical engineer who sort of had a bit of software experience through personal projects. So I didn't know we would be actually getting into something so intense and awesome. So yeah, that was an awesome experience. It was a really good steep learning curve. But yeah, I'm happy I had that. That was an awesome experience. At Leica, the expectation in reality, I would say I was a bit more prepared because I had done my internship at CSL. I had also done a few other virtual internships and stuff like that. So I was a bit more prepared on what I was expecting on Leica. Um, I think one thing I would say that I was surprised by is the amount of actual R&D electronics that you do. Like, if you think about it, you're thinking about it from a perspective that it's a medical instrumentation company. You don't really realize there's that much detail of actual, like, hardcore electronics. Like, there's PCB design, there's a bunch of different stuff that you don't even realize you're going to actually do in that role. I remember when I was reading the job description, it did mention PCB design, and that was one of the things that I was quite interested in doing because I was going back to my roots from the CSL internship back to my roots in electrical engineering. I was like, oh, this is an interesting thing. And then I didn't realize we were actually going to be doing PCB design to that extent and a bunch of software stuff. Yeah, I think that another thing that surprised me in Leica was that because I joined in as an R&D electronics engineer, you would expect you're not really working on a lot of different stuff outside of electronics, but you were. So when you get assigned a project, you're working on the software, you're working on the mechanical side of things, the electronics. So I think that was another thing that was pleasantly surprising because I really like that. I like working on different stuff. So I was very happy that Leica allows you to grow in that sense, that you can try different things.
That is actually kind of cool. I didn't know that that's actually you don't really just learn that one, but you also learn like other than electronics, you also learn about different kind of like field and stuff like that. So with that, I would like to ask like when you are learning or when you are learning and developing in that kind of opportunities or like in during that internship, do you have like any access to because previously you said that they give you a lot of trust in especially when in Leica they give you a lot of trust in the sense that you can create a lot of stuff on yourself, creating different kind of things, and you can get a lot of hands-on and experience. So I just want to ask, as a junior employee or as an intern in these two companies, do you get a lot of support and mentor by the senior team members? Is it more like a they throw a task to you and then you do it yourself with your own skills, or is it more like a senior and junior pairing up together, or is it like a all junior grouping up and doing a kind of project and then learning it, research it? How is it like?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a mix and depends on the project. at Leica. So at CSL, I was working purely as a student with a supervisor. So that was that kind of relationship. But at Leica, you have different projects. In some projects, I'm paired up with a senior kind of project manager kind of engineer. So they're working on actually doing the project management side of things, and then they allow me the freedom to actually work on the technical stuff. And if I need help, they will either help either they will offer help themselves, or they will get someone from that domain to sort of help me. So yeah, there's definitely that. And then there's also a buddy. So when you join Leica, you get assigned a buddy at the start, whenever you start. In my case, I had a person who was really awesome in both software and electronics, and they also had awesome experience with AI. So yeah, that was a really interesting buddy choice, because it sort of meshed really well with my interests. And yeah, you essentially get assigned a buddy that is your go-to person for asking advice about anything. That it doesn't just necessarily have to be about projects. You can also ask about general career advice, about progressing at Leica, all that kind of stuff. So you get assigned a buddy, and then obviously your manager is your kind of mentor type of thing, and they also make sure that you get assigned the necessary help to work on different projects. So yeah, they don't leave you alone in the ocean or something. They definitely do offer help, and they surround you with people that will help grow. And I think it's very important. I think Leica sort of struck a really good balance between holding your hands and also allowing you to grow. So sometimes it can be a bit too hand-holdy if you tell the person exactly what to do and how to do it. So, and sometimes it can be too independent when you just expect a student or grad to essentially make a project from scratch. But I think Leica sort of found a really good balance, particularly in my management. Shout out to Jamila. They found a really good balance of trying to get their junior employees to work with necessary amount of the least necessary amount of help needed. We work on this project, which is with other junior employees, and yeah, we don't necessarily have a senior person working on that project, but yeah, that's another project. I was about to say some technical details, which I probably shouldn't. It's confidential, but yeah, that's why.
Oh, good. Not to worry about it. With that one, because when you're working in all this AI, in bio infra system, biomedical IT, when you heard about all this stuff, people will feel like workload will be a lot. So what does it looks like when you're working in these two companies? Is it a work-life balance, or how does it look like in someone in your role? How's the workload?
Yeah, so the workload is, well, it's manageable as long as you I'm very, very talented. I think most places you're working in at the moment in Australia, you will have a lot of workload. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of the times. We have a lot of work to do. At CSL, it was a bit more relaxed because we were sort of working on a project, and it was just me and my supervisor. Um, at Leica, it was a bit more. It's a bit more hectic because you're sort of working on instruments which are impacting like real people in real time. So you really want to make sure that your instruments are fail-proof, error-proof, all that kind of stuff, and that can be sometimes intense. But I like that. I actually prefer intense environments. So yeah, I was always happy to work on those under those pressures. Even student teams have sort of prepared me with that, like they how to work in a stressful environment and actually try and deliver results quickly and rapidly. So yeah, I've always enjoyed that. In terms of work-life balance, both companies were awesome. CSL, I remember it was COVID, but still we try to have as many social events as possible, barbecues, going on conferences, all that kind of stuff. It was really nice. And at CSL, we were also a tight-knit team. And also I was working with other Europe students. So like the thing we discussed earlier, your program, Europe, we had a few other students who were working at CSL with me. So on lunch, we would catch up. We would sometimes go out for lunch. So that balance was really nice. And I saw a lot of students working alongside me. At Leica, similar as well. We've had a lot of social events, go-karting just recently with the team, badminton every Thursday, which is everyone's favorite. Yeah, so that kind of stuff. It's a really good work-life balance, and I think COVID sort of inspired a lot of companies to realize this aspect that you need to really have people motivated to actually deliver results. You can't just be working 9 to 5 without any kind of enjoyment. You need to have a bit of balance, and that's when you actually strike a good amount of compromise, get a bit of work done, do a bit of fun, and when you mesh them together, you actually get a lot more better results.
Cool, cool. Yeah. So I do agree with all the COVID restrictions. Some really can see a lot of companies that gradually really saw that social is also a part of life, well, not just working like 9 to 5. So with that, do you also, well, the companies, like, would you say these companies also kind of focus on like support systems in the company, like maybe mental health programs or like wellness supports or wellness programs? Do you have those kind of resources in CSL or Leica?
Yeah, so in both places, I remember they had particular programs for mental health well-being kind of related tangential programs where they made sure that everyone who is slightly struggling is taken care of. And yeah, I think it's also an important indicator of the environment. I think the work environment itself should also be very fostering to those kind of individuals, because obviously everyone goes through struggles at different times, and it's important that you have a workplace culture that supports that. And yeah, it's good to have dedicated programs, but it's also important to have employees that are trained and are basically known and are aware of the different signs and how they can help people without directly helping them. I think there's a bit more sophisticated way of trying to help someone without making it super obvious that you're trying to help them. Yeah, I think it's a thing that both companies have had. They've had really good employees in that sense. And I remember anytime I sort of seemed stressed with my uni exams or my uni assignments, um, I remember like a lot of people would just walk up and just say, "You're fine. Don't worry about it. I can take this task off of you. If you feel overloaded by this, we can push this date back up ahead. It's all fine." So yeah, and particularly in CSL, which was my first formal 12-month internship, I remember my manager Arthur was very accommodating with trying to go along with my uni balance, because sometimes uni just gets really busy and you can't really work with that in the back of your mind. So yeah, I remember I used to just tell him that, yeah, unfortunately I'm very busy this week, and Arthur was very understanding. Yeah, CSL was similar. So was Leica. They had this good understanding of how a person sort of can be a bit under the pump at uni, and they were always very helpful. And yeah, they were the same for other employees as well.
Oh, cool. So, also like when you talk about like social, we if we bring back to the social life when you say with that, you had like badminton, go-karting, and a lot of activities in companies. So, do you have like any friends that you working like? Do you make any friends when you're working in like CSL or currently in Leica? And also, do you feel like this kind of friends, is drinking also allowed or at work events? Is it like a yes or no with your friends, like when during work?
Yeah. So yeah, both places I made quite a few friends. At CSL, it was a bit more difficult because the first 6 months were completely online, so I didn't have much of a chance to sort of meet with the people I was working with, and it's a bit difficult to make friendships over Teams. But yeah, we tried. I did make a lot more friends after we sort of went in person, and yeah, it was an awesome experience. At Leica, similar. Yeah, there are quite a few students and grads who were along the same age as me. So yeah, I made quite a few friends with there, and then I also made quite a few friends with the seniors. Like it's always important to sort of sit down at lunch and get some very good and wisdom and advice from some of the seniors, because they sometimes impart these little nuggets of information that can stick in your brain for eternity, and like very helpful pieces of information. So yeah, made quite a few friends there. In terms of work events and drinking, recently I actually went to an event where a Christmas kind of break event where we went into the city and people were like, we went to a bar and stuff, and people were drinking. I don't personally drink, so as a religious reason, so I don't drink. But the nice thing was the company was very accommodating with that. So they had alternatives. So I only ate halal, and they had options for halal. They had options for vegan, vegetarian, and they also had non-alcoholic drinks and water. And they were very understanding that, well, I don't drink, so they won't even offer me that kind of stuff. So it was really nice that they were accommodating with different dietary restrictions. Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay.
Mm.
Okay. So I also do have a question is that do you have any type of like preference or like in your working in CSL and also Leica? Is it has to be a remote work from home or is it have to be in office in person more? Like which kind of method or like type of working types is Leica and CSL?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, because I'm very undecided on that. I feel like both have their pros and cons. At CSL, like I said, first 6 months I was completely remote. So that was an interesting experience because you get to learn a lot of different ways of actually doing, let's say, visual management. You're not really face to face. So how do you actually tackle the challenge of doing online collaborative work? So you get this different skill set, which remote work or work from home sort of equips you with. Um, yeah, I think that was also good. Also, the flexibility of just working from home is a lot convenient, because you can just wake up at 8:30 a.m. and you're ready for 9 a.m. meeting without having to, like, driving all the way to the city or anything like that. So I think that flexibility is awesome. But I think it can also be slightly consequential, that it could hurt your social kind of bearings a bit. So because sometimes it's just important to have a bit of social interaction every so often, and sometimes if you become too accustomed to work from home, you can start to lose some of your social battery. And I think, yeah, it's important to regularly have social, rather just meet up in the office every so often. I know some companies, they have like this in software engineering especially, but you don't necessarily have to come in every day. A lot of the times people still come in one day a week just so that they can have a face-to-face interaction. It's important sometimes just to have a pulse check. Um, and then obviously, if you're working in a more R&D hardware kind of role, so you're actually building stuff and you have to be in the lab, then there is no choice. You have to be on in office every single day. Well, at least as much as you can. And I think I actually prefer that in that role. So like in software engineering, it makes sense to work from home most days. But if you're in a hardware kind of role, I think it's important to go in and physically build stuff. I'm sure there are different ways of trying to simulate stuff online and do it work from home, but I just think it's more awesome when you're actually working with your hands and building stuff. So yeah, both have their place in different roles. It makes sense for different kind of work arrangements, but in my case, if I were to choose one, I would definitely have a hybrid. So like maybe one day work from home, but the other days come into the office, just so they have the
Oh, cool.
flexibility.
Yeah, definitely have the flexibility. Same. Totally agree that because usually when you're going into office too much, it's sometimes your body just can't cope with all the traveling and all the way there, and then you're mentally, physically so ready for everything. But sometimes work from home kind of gives you a little like a half off day kind of vibe at home. You can kind of take a little break on your own time. You can also fix your own time for working and then fix your own time for your own time. I mean, rest time. Yeah, which is kind of cool as well. So can you kind of talk us about how does this compare? I would say what is the coolest perk or like the coolest benefits you get from CSL compared to um Leica? I would say we don't compare like both of the benefits. How would it be like?
Yeah. So the benefit for CSL would be, well, CSL is a massive company and it's well renowned. So I think that's a pretty good something to have on your resume, and especially if you really like working in that sort of field, I think it's a good thing to have in your resume. Personally, I never applied for the graduate role at CSL, so I'm not entirely sure of sort of what the best perk of a graduate role would be. I know in terms of internship, the way it was basically you're working with some of the smartest people in that industry, so that's definitely a perk. Also, you get to work with a lot of the other Europe students, so that's another perk. You're working with some of the best, well, upcoming researchers. That's always a good place to be. um, and yeah, it's an awesome environment, awesome office. The work is awesome and gratifying because you're actually working on stuff that really matters to people in real life. Yeah, so that's the perk of CSL. At Leica, I would say the perks. It would probably be, yeah, hands-on skills. I think, at least from my experience, I'm not sure how much manufacturing is done in Australia. That's completely done by the company itself. Is usually outsourced. So I think Leica affords you the opportunity to see the entire life cycle of the product. And I think that affords you a perspective that's a bit more holistic than other companies. That's a good perk. Also, amazing people at Leica. The management's cool. It's a very chill environment. Uh, Social events, badminton every Thursday. You have a badminton place right next door. Amazing stuff. And you also have one of the best kebab places nearby, Glenny's Kebabs. And that's a perk as well. Yeah, it's a good place to be.
Oh, really good. So it means that work environment really matters when it comes to no matter what kind of roles or no matter what kind of companies you're working in. So I would say working culture is kind of important as well. And from here, we can see that CSL and Leica really gives you a very good working culture, and you're really happy with all these experiences as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, good. So with that one, can you kind of walk us through like what happens if you do well in your current role, intern role? Is it gonna be a promotion? And it's like how is the career progression looks like? Did you become a um senior in your role, or I would say, or did you have to go to another field, or is it like you have to in the same field but in different departments? Like how is it works, or how does it looks like in your role?
Yeah, so I can speak about Leica most recently. So at Leica, you essentially have different ladders of how you want to progress. You have the corporate ladder, and you also have the technical ladder. So you have different levels of engineers. So a graduate would be P1, and then you have P2, P3, P4, P5, up until I believe P6, and then you also have the managerial levels. And there are different kind of ladders, and people choose what their personal preference is. If someone prefers the managerial side of things, they can go down that ladder. If someone prefers to remain technical throughout their time, they can go down that ladder. Usually at Leica, at least, there's no formal graduate program. It's more of a graduate role. So you get placed into a role, and then depending on your performance, I think the KPIs and stuff, that's when you actually graduate into that position. I will be personally doing my graduate role elsewhere, so not at Leica, but yeah, at Leica you do have around 3 years of graduate role, I believe. Like two, it's not fixed, but it's between 2 and 3 years. After which they give you the graduate, rather you move to a next level P2. And in terms of your progression, so you start off with just regular, let's say you start off with graduate electronics engineer, then you go into electronics engineer 1, electronics engineer 2, and then there's senior, and then there's levels above that. I believe it caps off at senior principal hardware engineer. But I could be wrong about that. I'm not entirely sure. But there are levels to this in technical side. And then if you want, you can always move on to the managerial side. And then you can go into manager of a resource group. So in this case, it would be electronics resource group, and then manager of that. And then you keep on going. Yeah.
Cool, cool. So what if a person they do a little bit poor, I would say not meeting the expectations of the KPIs or like the requirements they need to do within to fulfill the role. So is that going to be a transition to another department, or what did they do with that one, like that in that situation?
Yeah, I'd imagine so. I'd imagine they would be. So they have regular, there's a big emphasis on having one-on-one sort of catch-ups with the manager. So I'd imagine some of the KPIs, if a person's not beating them, that would be highlighted in one of those meetings. And they would probably lay out some steps on how they can get back on track. Because at the end of the day, if the person has been hired for that position, they probably are a competent person, and maybe they just aren't finding the right tools to get that performance in. So I'm sure they'll probably have something to address that. That maybe there is something that is underlying issue that they could fix, perhaps. But I'd imagine that if it does come to the conclusion that the person is ultimately a better fit for a different department, they would go about doing a transition to a different department. Because at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure most companies would like to retain their employees because they have that initial experience, right? Like getting the training and all that stuff is always a big undertaking for the company. So once they have an employee that's trained, they really want to keep that person in so that they can try and minimize a lot of redundant training. So they've got the person trained, they'll maybe move them to a different department if it seems like the person's performance might be better suited to that one. But yeah, I'd imagine if someone's not meeting KPIs, it's probably something that will be brought up in their meetings, and something that the manager would definitely address.
Yeah, that's true. But like for example, if you are staying in that company, do you see that people like the colleagues or people in your position or in other departments, how long do they usually stay in the company generally for? Like, is it for 3 years, like a graduate program, 14 months, and then after that they will transit to another company, or is more like a career progression within the company and the salary also keep progressing up, or is it more like a jumping into different companies and getting more like a different focus? Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because I've seen sort of both. if I'm being completely honest. So like a recent example, I met someone who's been actually working at Leica for more than I've been actually alive. So that was an
Mm.
interesting
Wow.
experience where someone's been working for more than 20 odd years. So it was an interesting thing to learn. And then actually there are a bunch of people who actually done that. Like there are three or four that I know directly that have been working for 20 plus years and they've been completely loyal to Leica. I've also seen people who have jumped ships every, let's say, 2 years, and I think it really comes down to circumstances. Some people aren't looking at Leica as the eventual goal; they're looking at it more of a stepping stone where they're trying to get some skills, and then they move on to something else that they might be more interested in. And I think I'm a big advocate for trying to find something you're interested in rather than being stuck if you don't like it. If you like it, stay on. But if you don't like it, it's important to move on to a place that you think you might enjoy more. And it's always good to get experiences from places that perhaps is not the best fit for you, but at least you've got some experience in a different side of things. And in terms of examples, my previous manager went from a student engineer, progressed to a graduate, progressed to the levels of engineering, and within 10 years, I believe, he's actually been promoted to the senior principal hardware engineer. So that's like the highest level that an engineer can go, I believe. So within 10 years, so I've seen examples of all kinds. So in this example, a person's progressed from a student engineer all the way to the top. So that's a good example to set for the rest of the team. And yeah.
This is very, very cool. So in that, so would you say your long-term career plans would be staying in Leica, or like as you said, you might want to do different kind of graduate roles in different companies, but within that field, like where to, and like is it from here or is it, yeah, what is it gonna be like in your plan?
In terms of staying on Leica, yeah, I think it's an awesome place to be as a electronics engineer. I have an ambition to sort of go into research eventually, and particularly in research in computer vision. So I'm sort of looking for something that's tangential to that, something that can sort of teach me or move me along that way. I know Leica has a branch in Vista in California where they work on computer vision side of things. I think that could be an interesting prospect, perhaps. But yeah, my eventual goal is to sort of go into research and research in an industry kind of thing. So sort of doing it research, but also working alongside actual projects that affect the industry. So yeah, in terms of long-term plans, Leica could fit in that.
Yeah, so you can learn a little bit more stuff, not just about the company, but also the whole industry as a whole. With different companies, you kind of like get different insights from different parts of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool actually. Yes. Okay, so with that one, I would say, what if you're given a second chance? Would you still choose Leica and CSL? Or like do you have any regrets or yeah, would you do that again? Or would you do it differently, you would say?
Um, so I'm a big believer of not having regrets because I think when you have those experiences, you get to learn a lot of different things that you might not have learned if you didn't. So I think just going through that experience can teach you a few things that are quite important. And they might not be the most positive experiences. In my case, hopefully, like, thankfully, both of them were. But even if they're not, I think it's good to not have regrets because you sort of learn something from it, anyways. It's always a learning experience. There's this really good quote that reminds me of the situation. There's an Urdu idiom which translates to saying that a hawk shouldn't be afraid of gusts of wind because those gusts of wind are meant to make the hawk fly higher. So it's a very bad translation, but essentially what I'm trying to say is even if you do face challenges in those internships or those experiences, you're sort of getting a really good learning experience because you can always bounce back from that. In terms of doing things differently, though, yes, in hindsight, one thing I would do differently is definitely do more work in student teams. So in student, I was part of three different student teams, but there were a couple of reasons: uni workload and also an injury that sort of impeded me from going to the campus as often as I would like, which sort of impeded how I could contribute to a student team. But I think putting more effort into the student team would be even more beneficial. Um, yeah, I think that's one thing that I would do differently. In terms of jobs, I'm not too sure if I would do anything differently. I think the experience I've had so far is good. Yeah, and I'm thankful for everything I've got so far.
Yeah, perfect. That I really like the quote that you say. So it's not it's not bad. So don't feel bad. Yeah, I really like that because it's always sometimes it's just about the time, like when everything comes in right and you don't regret any decisions. Sometimes in that moment of time you feel like I might regret in the future, but at the end you feel like it's actually kind of works. It's actually pushed me even more further, or it kind of gives you more insights about I actually kind of lucky that I did this, even though it might be not the right one that I thought at first place. So I feel like this is actually a very good one that you say, like the code. I really like that. What's the one thing you wish you had known when you started off your uni? Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think one thing I would have loved to have known at uni, right at the start, would be the emphasis on skills. Um, at workplace, I think importantly, most companies they're looking at the skills that you possess rather than what degree you're studying. And sometimes a lot of people they can pour time into books and actually just getting grades, which is great, which is what I tried to do as well for a long, long period of time. But then I realized that skills is also as important, and it's important to upskill. And sometimes, like let's take an example, PCB design. It's not something that's strictly taught in your electrical engineering curriculum, at least at Monash. It's something that you have to tangentially learn. And I think that's one thing that you should have an open mindset of, is that you don't necessarily just have to study what you studied at uni, your degree. That's not just what you're going to be doing at work. At work, you're going to be doing different things. So one thing that I would recommend any person who's looking to go into a particular field to do is just look at the job requirements of any post. Even if you're like in your first year, just look at the job requirements and just look at the skills that they're looking for, and try and slowly and gradually introducing them into your own skill set toolbox, because that's something that's going to come in handy when you're applying for your graduate role eventually. I think skills are a very important thing in projects and skills go hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And then every time when you finish a student project, when you finish like a role, or like when you finish a skill set, it kind of like graduates, it tells you that if I'm good at it, or if I'm talented, if I'm kind of bad, or like if I should do more kind of practice in it, which I feel like you already have a lot of that like experience in it, and you really graduate and grow a lot of it will be full already in your skill box, I feel like. Yeah, so it's quite impressive. Yeah.
Kind, too
And with
kind.
that, I would like to conclude like any final advice that you would like to share with any new graduates, because now it's December, it's a graduating season, I would say. So what kind of advice you would tell them to if they want to start graduate program, or any internship roles, or any roles they want to start in CSL or in your current company, which is Leica.
Yeah. So I went to this recently. I went to a career event where I was sort of speaking to different students, and the one advice that I would like to regurgitate, or rather reiterate, that I said over there was just apply. You should, like, the first hurdle is going to apply, because a lot of people will think they don't have the skills necessary for that role, and you'll have that slight bit of imposter syndrome essentially, initially. But you should always apply and see what happens, because the worst that can happen is that you might get a bit of feedback saying that you can improve this aspect of your resume, or that you can improve this aspect of your cover letter. And if it works out, you could get an interview, and maybe you could ace your interview and you could get the job. So there's no harm in trying. They're not going to penalize you for trying to apply to a role. So always try to apply as much as you can. Do not be afraid that you don't have the skills. Skills is something you can develop on the job as well. The most important thing is that your passion should show through. It should show through that you have the eagerness to learn. It should show through that you have the keen and the willingness to adapt, to upskill yourself, and do all those things that are necessary to be a good worker in a company. You don't have to be a skillful person, because if they were looking for someone with the skills already, they would just employ someone a bit more senior than a student or a grad. So make sure that you're applying. Do not be afraid to basically apply to different places, even if you think you're not suitable. Just see if it fits, and if you're interested. Obviously, the most important thing is if you're interested in that role, you should apply. There's always an other side to that, where people will just indiscriminately apply to every place. I think that's not wise either. You should try and apply to places you're actually interested in, because then otherwise you get a lot of different interviews and you're like, oh, which one should I do? Make sure you just initially itself try and save everyone time and look for the ones that you're genuinely interested in, even if you don't have the skills for them. In terms of people who are starting their internship or their grad role, I would say just be an open mind And I think those first couple of weeks are probably the best time you're going to have in establishing connections with your workmates. Just try and be present in that office for the first 2 weeks. Just even if they give you the luxury to work from home, if you give you the convenience, which is awesome, but just maybe for the first couple of weeks, just come into the office and sort of meet the team, get a vibe of what the different stuff is happening in the team and the projects they're working on. I think it'll be a good experience because in the future, when you actually work from home, you'll be able to interact with them and not just have a very surface level conversation. You will be able to actually have deep conversations. I think those first 2 weeks are crucial in your role, and just be open minded. Don't just directly start a project. Be a bit more relaxed in the way you're approaching things. Try to learn the work culture, try to understand what products they're working on, and then ask your manager for a project. If they don't assign you one, be more gentle in your approach and try to get a project that you're actually genuinely interested in rather than grasping at the first one that comes at you, because it's going to be good for in the long run when you're really established in that company before you pick up a project.
Okay, so I think with that being said, I would say like being passionate and then being open-minded and during like even finding for internships, finding for grad roles, or even when you're in the company, and also really be positive and also be active out there would be somehow the keys of finding a job or even like finding anything that you want to do in any of the roles or any of the fields. If
Yep,
that's what we used to say. Yeah, perfect.
exactly.
And I would like to say thank you so, so, so much for joining this interview. And thank you for sharing so many insightful experience about the related field and also about like all this graduate roles, like the systems, how it works, working culture, about how does it be like a intern in this two CSL and also Leica Biosystem company. And I would really like to thank you. Is there anything else you want to conclude before we end this interview?
No, I just want to say thanks back again. Thank you for making this a coherent interview because I have a habit of blabbering on. So thank you for keeping the structure of the interview. And yeah, thank you for inviting me here. Happy to share knowledge as much as I can. Just a quick advice on anyone, if anyone's watching this. If you want any advice, I'm not some guru or something, but I'd be happy to help as much as I can. I remember when I was looking for advice, yeah, I would just cold email people and just try to message them on LinkedIn. So yeah, I'm more than happy to get your messages on LinkedIn. Just holler at me. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to help anyone with advice, resume templates, cover letter templates, anything. I'm more than happy to help. And yeah, good luck with everything. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.